how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 179, and it takes place over FaceTime. I got to chat with Layng Martine Jr. He's a hit songwriter. He's written cuts for Elvis and Reba, Trisha Yearwood, just to name a few. Exceptional writer. He just wrote a book called Permission to Fly, and that book is actually inspired by an essay he wrote that ended up in the New York Times Modern Love column. And I'll put a link to that on heyhumanpodcast.com because it's a really cool essay. Layng is a really interesting guy. He's had quite the adventurous life. He worked for Benny Goodman. He has been chased by serial killers. At least I think they were serial killers. The stories he has are really quite incredible. Again, reading his book, Permission to Fly, every page I turned, I thought, really? There was a lot of that going on. His life has been just one open door into another wormhole of wildness. I would consider him very blessed, but I think part of that is because he's willing to take leaps, and you got to take the leaps, right, to get to the good stuff. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So definitely check out the links page at heyhumanpodcast.com to learn more about Layng and to get his book and check out that article and stuff and hear songs that he has done. Usual stuff, social, when I say done, I mean written, songs he has written. I suppose I need to clarify that. Social media stuff. Hey Human Podcast is on Instagram and Facebook. Susan Ruthism, SUSAN is on Facebook, Twitter, and what did I miss? Instagram? I think so. Anyway, you get the drill. It's out there. There's stuff everywhere. SusanRuth.com if you want to learn more about me and my performances or my art or my music. And speaking of performances, see that nice segue? On November 5th, I am going to be hopping up on stage with some really talented people at Second City Hollywood for the Office Hours show. So that's going to be super cool. If you are in the neighborhood, please come check that out. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. And what else? I mentioned the links page, which is at heyhumanpodcast.com. Also on the website is the Amazon portal. If you shop Amazon and you do so through the Amazon portal there on that front page, it really helps Hey Human. And that would be awesome. That's pretty much it. Let's get into it. Layng Martine, The Adventurer. Permission to Fly is the book. Thanks for listening, everybody. Here we go. Layng Martine, welcome to Hey Human.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's such a treat to be here.
It took us a couple tries between the two of us, didn't it?
I did, yeah, but we solved it.
We did. Between house repairs here at my place and you traveling, the schedule's got a little cattywampus, but here we are. All right, let's get right into it. You wrote a book called Permission to Fly.
I did.
Yeah, and it's all about your coming uphood, your childhood and growing up adventures.
Right. Well, it's called Permission to Fly because that's what my mom gave me at an early age. She set me and my rampant curiosity loose to explore, make mistakes. When I did make mistakes, she did not rescue me. She convinced me instead that I could rescue myself, and that turned out to be kind of the key to finding out who the heck I am.
That's a really empowered stance of parenting, I think.
I think so too. She had a lot of guts, she had a lot of common sense. I think she also knew she believed that I could sort of handle it. She wasn't just reckless by any means. She just thought, this kid's okay, he's fine, let him go, And I would have, at quite a young age, I had, adventures and experiences outside the home, which really translated later on to being able to sort of take care of myself. And because at a young age, I'd have these sort of childhood mishaps, flat tire on your bike 10 miles from home kind of thing. And, you figure it out. You don't call your mother, you get a ride somewhere, you go to a gas station, see what has to happen. It just turned out to be very helpful always.
You also grew up in a time where I feel that figuring things out on one's own was paramount because you didn't have cell phones. You didn't have a way to get the message out immediately. You really did have to solve things on your own.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
How does that affect how you parent your own children?
Well, I think we were very much that way. My wife was a fabric designer and very successful one in New York. So she had the sort of artistic, whatever, the thing of paying attention to feelings and stuff that you kind of have if you're, a writer or whatever she was doing also. And so we both felt that trusting our kids and convincing them that they could take care of themselves was the thing to do, because we do it gradually. Initially it's just around your immediate neighborhood, around your house or whatever, and then it expands. And as they go out and they high school, and like Tucker, our middle child, was 16 and he had his license just a few weeks, and he wanted to go to, I think, Apple Valley in Wisconsin was where he went, was a venue for Bob Dylan. He was performing there. And Tucker went up there, drove up there in his car. But he also took a little stove with him, and he cooked the grilled sandwiches and stuff for people and sold them and made money. And, he just learned to fend for himself. And we did something when kids got older, when they were teenagers. After high school, we told them that we would give them each one plane ticket anywhere in the world once a year. The key to that was, the corollary to it was that they had to supply all the rest of the money, and food or car rental if there was, or trains or whatever else. So we would give them a ticket, but once they got there, everything else was up to them. And Tucker took probably the most advantage of it, although they all did. He went only to really dangerous places. He went to West Africa, 25 years ago, when it was really, back country of Turkey. He went to Russia with his high school, so that was a guided trip. So he's been to a lot of, but they all went to wherever they wanted to go and explored, and they were generally by themselves. They didn't have a buddy. So our youngest boy was hiking in the Swiss Alps, and it started snowing, and all the trails suddenly were snowed over and invisible. And so he was, got a little. Fortunately, some German tourists or something came along who knew their way, and they guided him out of there. But these little sort of shaky, hair-raising things that come up when you're young make an impression on you, because you see, oh well, I got out of that. I figured it out. And it comes in handy when you're older.
Yeah, I do feel that the biggest disservice many parents, and I don't have children, so really I'm talking out my butt, but I do, just as an observer, I think that the greatest disservice parents do with their kids is to not let them fail.
Yeah, failing is just critical, because I know a million entrepreneurial people, and they fail. Not everything works, and they never even mention it. I'm telling you, I'll have lunch with them, and then they'll say, last year I did this, such and then this or that happened, and man, they didn't even mention it while it was happening, because they expect it. It was, like in my case, pitching songs. I didn't expect everyone to record every song I ever. Most of the time, I played them songs, and they turned them off. I didn't like them for one reason. That's just what you expect. You're looking for the right match, And with songs, I felt, oh, wait, it's my job to bring them a song they like. It's not their job to like my song. That's a big difference. And so all of these little attitudinal tweaks that you can do with yourself, they keep you from being depressed when something doesn't work out. You just know you're on the way somewhere, and there isn't a smooth path to anything that you really care about. The more you care about it, the harder everything gets. Like with our kids, I'd say, if they just want to throw the football in the yard, that's one thing, but you want to be Peyton Manning, that's a whole different ballgame, and it's true kind of in everything, It gets real hard when you care about it.
Did your kids ever push back on that, or did you as a kid push back on that freedom? Because I think there's an irony in that with, the safety of feeling like something is completely taken care of versus the freedom that it's not. Was there pushback?
I honestly, Susan, maybe there was, but I don't remember it. We made it clear that, if you want to drive to Apple Valley or, Mississippi and see a concert and everything, I mean, it's up to you. And we're not driving down there to help you change a tire or to, and even when they had cell phones, it's just, it's your thing, I mean, if you're totally puzzled, and you think we might be able to help, that's one thing, but we're not coming down there to do it. And what happened? I mean, we just said, listen, when you walk in the room, people are going to like you because you're a decent person. So tell them what your problem is. If you've got a problem, knock on a home. If you're way in the woods, and just tell them what your problem is. They're going to help you, and most people will. And
the ones that aren't serial killers.
Yeah, they're not, and most people don't expect that you are, and there's a way out of just about everything. I mean, I say that, I wouldn't really know what to do if someone in an alley attacked me, and that I really wouldn't know what to do. But that's not generally what all of us are contending with as we grow up. It's usually, something to do with school early on, and then it's your first jobs and your first boss and your cars that don't work beautifully, and you're looking for an apartment and hassling it out when you don't have enough money for your first rents and stuff. Those are all, you can take care of all that stuff because, I mean, if it's rent, you just get more jobs or whatever. You work hard, I don't think we ever had, I didn't feel any pushback because they kind of knew going out that it was up to them, and they never said, hey, you're not bailing me out. They never, honest to God, they never asked to be bailed out, ever. None of them ever. So
I know a couple of your kids. They're very kind and very thoughtful and very measured, I would say. Measured is a good word. They're not saying something just to say it. Do you know what I mean?
That's nice, Susan. Yeah, I think that's certainly borne out in my experience with them. You can't get them to do anything they don't want to do or say anything they don't want to say, no matter what, because they'll always be fair players, but they're not gonna gloss it over.
Yeah, I trust people like that. In a world full of shim-sham people, I trust people that are, don't say something unless they need to say it, and don't gild the lily, as it were.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't think they do that.
No.
I hope they don't. Who knows?
They don't. I don't think they do either. All right, let's get back to you. The first thing that struck me when reading your book, and one thing that's tricky, and I mentioned this a lot on the podcast, is when I do speak with people who have written a book, to try not to spoil the book for people that haven't read it, but still ask you questions pertinent to the book. So I'll do my best. Feel free to say, I don't want to talk about that because I want people to read it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, no, there's nothing to divulge or to ruin, because it's just a continuing story. It doesn't have a moment where you're wondering, what, and then there's some big twist. It's just a person living and all the goods, bads, and uglies that go with it. When you're really taking chances. Fortunately, I had a wife who has an immense amount of courage. We took lots of chances, and I'm sure we'll take more, because, to do interesting things, you have to keep taking chances.
One thing I noticed about it, the first thing I want to comment on is your parents were nudists?
Well, on weekends, they usually were, yeah. They would, as I said, they'd cook pancakes or vacuum in the nude and stuff. And once in a while, neighborhood kids we had 5 kids in our family, so there were lots of friends and stuff. But once in a while, kids would walk in and see my mom without any clothes, or dad or whatever. And they just would, sometimes they would ask first, and they'll, look, I'm coming over there. Is your mother bare ass? And, I'd say, yeah, but I'll tell her you're coming, or, whatever. So I ran into someone, Susan, you may remember from the book, I ran into someone not long ago who knew my sister, and I didn't know this guy, and when he realized that I was, she was my sister, he said, did your parents put their clothes on yet? This is like 30 years after he had seen them with no clothes on.
How did that give you a sense of your own sense of self growing up in a family where because most of the time parents are like, put your clothes on, put your this on, it's a shameful thing to be naked. So the antithesis of that, I'm curious to know how that shaped you personally.
I don't know. My parents were they were big on being a straight shooter. That's what they were mainly. If you I mean, none of us, I think it's fair to say, none of us would ever think of lying, and we just we just were on the level, and they were totally on the, and that was what their big expectation was, and so I didn't think of anything. They were just on the level. They like to walk around with no clothes on.
But how did that make you feel, like, for your own sense of self?
I was so used to it. They did it since I was like a little tiny kid.
But you kids weren't nudists at all.
No, our kids?
No, you and your siblings.
None of the kids. I don't remember any of the other kids doing that.
Okay.
And in fact, I have one brother, my closest brother to me, who doesn't even remember that. But the reason that I know I'm not crazy is that my sister, who is the youngest, very much remembers it, and so do her friends. So
hilarious. It's so funny.
Yeah.
So you wrote about your mom having postpartum depression, but the weird thing when I was reading it, it seemed like it didn't affect you really. You sort of passed in and out of it. But as an adult now, looking back, do you think you were more affected by it?
Well, first of all, I was just totally crazy about my mother, because she was the one who had this incredibly nourishing way about it, which she just convinced me. She just said, "Layng, you're wonderful." I mean, I just got the best up, at the same time. If I did something that wasn't so wonderful, she had absolutely no problem saying, "Layng, that was horrendous. You don't do that." But her primary message was, "You're really capable, you're really smart, and you're just a good person." And just so there was, I think that helps you completely always be on the level, because I always felt, well, there's really nothing I can do to disappoint her, because she likes me, she believes in me, so I'm going to make sure that she never, that I never do disappoint her. There was a time when I quit a job that my dad had gotten me, which was the most useless job I had ever heard of. I'd had a really good job that I liked one summer. And he said, "I think you should try this job," which happened to be selling magazines door to door. And I tried it for 2 days, and it was just a scam. And I just said, "This is terrible. I'm not doing this." So I quit. I was polite to the guy when I left, but I went home, told my mom I wasn't doing that anymore, and I was going to go back to the job that I had in the first place. And she told me I was a welcher, meaning backing out on what my promise was. And I said, I'm never promising to do anything that's sort of a scam. So yeah, I quit that job, and I'm never going back, and no one should do that. It's not needed. You don't have to, do that to earn money. So I mean, she had no problem, telling you what she thought, but in general, she would tell you how you can handle it rather than how she can handle it for you.
You mentioned a moment in the book where you walk in on her and she's on the floor and she's very sad. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah. Yes, she. It was when I first begun writing songs, and I used to try all my new lyrics out on her to see if they made sense or if I lost her anywhere. And I walked into her room one day. She was lying on the floor, and I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "I don't know. I can't get up." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "I don't know. There's just something." So I leaned down with my lyrics that I'd just written and held them up in front of her, and I said, "Well, what do you think of this first verse?" And I used that as an example of how incredibly obsessed I was, and often people are, with whatever they're doing versus the fact that this person's lying on the floor and can't get up. So the obsession is a great thing, because it lets you ride over all kinds of disappointments, but it's got its drawbacks, like that. At whatever age I was, 20 or something, not really realizing that, hey, my mom can't get up off the floor. What can I do to help her? Thinking more about my lyrics, which not a good thing in that case. But
did you come to realize that she was struggling with some stuff?
Oh, well, that day it was her back.
Oh, okay.
It was her back. It was physical. Oh,
I see.
Well, Susan, really, the first hint that I ever had that she had mental issues was the day I walked in on her when she was using an egg beater in the kitchen and crying while she was making, pudding or something. And she was just sobbing over this egg beater, and she said she didn't know what was wrong, and it was very soon after that she went away for a year, and we had all these little kids, one of whom was either a year old or less than a year, and we had to get all these caregivers in to take care of us while my dad went to work. But subsequently, many years later, I talked a lot with her about it, and she said that when she was very young, 8 or 9, that she knew there was something wrong with her, that she just didn't view the world positively so often. She was often depressed, and she had gone to a doctor, and they didn't really know what to do, and they told the parents that she was fine and all that. But later on, she had 4 major breakdowns as an adult, and one of them was this time when I was 10. She went off for a year, and there were these other 4 kids. You know, we basically fended for ourselves so much of the time. None of the caregivers knew anything about children, and the longest running one had never had any kids, and so they didn't know how to handle us. So we kind of were, 5 of us kind of handled ourselves or whatever. It certainly gave me a lot of empathy for her, or for anybody who gets overwhelmed, because anybody who's trying in the world gets overwhelmed. And I have incredible empathy for people who, just hit a point where they can't hack it, and I get it. And so, but my mom never lost her sweetness, never lost her goodness, never lost her empathy for each of us. We really missed her. I think we didn't see her for 6 or 8 months, and then she gradually began coming home for, an hour or 2 at a time, and gradually eased back into being in the family. But when she did come home, finally, my dad hired a helper for her for, laundry and certain things like that. But he was lucky. We were lucky that he had the economics to do that. Because if you hadn't had a decent economic situation and the mom went off, that would have been an immense problem. It was a problem anyway, but it would have been immense if he hadn't been able to hire some people to stay with us.
Did she talk at all about her stay in the wherever she went for the year?
It's funny you mention that. I knew the doctor. I got to know the doctor slightly who took care of her, and he was an incredibly kind guy. He eventually ended up at Harvard. At the time, he was at what's become the Weil. I don't know if you know the Weil Center, connected with, I think it's with New York Hospital. It's very famous. It's in White Plains, New York. This guy, his name was Munter, went to Boston and Harvard, and that's where I met him. And, he told me that my mom, he said that, my dad was an extremely strong person. My dad had grown up as an only child and sort of had to fend for himself and figure it all out. Anyway, that he was this really strong person, and that my mom clearly benefited a lot from him being a strong person. But, she was, as I said in the book, she was Catholic and had a very, very, very strong father, and she just kept having babies, and my dad really was not that bonkers over kids. He was a very, very good person, very responsible person, but he wasn't just naturally crazy about kids. I am personally naturally crazy about kids. It's still not a snap, although I thought it was pretty easy, because we had, these boys were just a pleasure pretty much all the time. I mean, it sounds impossible, but they really were. So I was just, bonkers over them, but that really wasn't his thing. And so he was saddled with these 5 kids, and just the fact that her being Catholic and this thing of that she, her religion meant having all these kids, and at the same time she was the one who had to take care of them all day. And so anyway, it was, but later on, when she did have 3 more these major breakdowns where she had to have shock treatments. Shock treatment is what actually brought her out of it, which is kind of amazing because it sounds so kind of archaic and old-fashioned. But apparently it's coming back today because it really does unjumble people's thinking, and it clears it out, makes them able to think clearly again. So anyway.
Is that what, did she go through shock treatment during that year away? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, she did. Yeah. And then they gave it to her 2 more times that really helped her. But when she was in her 90s, they didn't, even though she wanted them, because they said her wasn't strong enough to take it.
How long? Did she live well into her 90s?
Yeah, 95.
Wow, that's a life.
Yeah. And she was really savvy up until the last couple of years when she, really was incredibly, depressed and kind of in bed all the time. But up till then, Susan, we used to go out for beers when she was well into her 90s and have the best time. And I told her at least 650,000 times how much I loved her, how much she'd help me, how much I knew that without her I'd be a dust particle. I feel the same way about my wife. But you just need helpers. You need people who believe in you. And she was always there to believe in me. And no matter what happened, she just totally had faith that I was a good person and I could handle it and I'd be fine. And despite all the crashes that I had in my life, she never thought I was a loser or that, she would always say things, Layng, that's nothing you can't handle. Even when I was 10, that's nothing you can't handle. With a teacher hates your guts and gives you terrible grades and yells at you all the time in class and always makes an example of you. Layng, you're stuck with each other. Work it out, and then just gives you the message. Okay, now you're 18, now you're 25, now you're 30. Nobody's bailing you out. How do you bail yourself out? How do you get out of this? And it was just incredibly helpful all along the way.
Were you close with your father the same way?
Less close to him because he wasn't really what I would call an intimate person. My mom was very intimate. There was basically no subject off the table with her. Nothing. Growing up and sex and wet dreams and all the stuff that scares the crap out of you when you're crazy about girls and you don't know what to do and you're lying there in your bed at night. She always would have that one sentence that you needed. And so, but my dad was much more, simple sense. I made a list one time. My wife and I made a list about 20 years ago. We were going to visit them. They'd rented a house in Georgia nearby, and we were going to go. Made a list of about 20 questions to ask him to try to bring out and honestly, Susan, most of the answers were one word. Why did you leave that job in 1940, selling space for that baby magazine? I can't remember. Or whatever. And so all the things that we thought might bring out the emotion and stuff really didn't. He probably had them, but it wasn't just something that he was naturally sharing. But he made some incredibly important decisions for me that I wasn't smart enough to make for myself. I didn't do well at my first year in college. I didn't fail, but I didn't do well. And he said, I'm not paying for you to go back there. But what he did do was he knew I was interested in writing, and he had connections at Time magazine, and he got me a job for 1 year as a copy boy there, which was a very low-level job, but it put me in touch with all these brilliant people, and they became my standard. I did not want any longer ever in my life to work around people that weren't really, really smart. And so half of these people became really famous authors. I don't know if you know Calvin Trillin, John McPhee, a guy named, he had like 11 names. He became a big screenwriter. And they were the people that when something happened in the world, I could go back and say, hey, tell me some background on this. So at the end of that year, when I decided I better go back to college and get more education so I can earn the right to be around these people, they were my new standard. And I'd always wanted to be surrounded by really smart people, and I was very lucky when I got to Nashville, and Ray Stevens, who is an official, total 1,000% genius, decided that he would help me, learn to be a better songwriter and so on. But because all his friends were Chet Atkins and all these other geniuses, so it just meant an immense amount to me to just say, God, man, these really bright people can teach you so much. I mean, like, I don't know if you remember from the book, but when I was like about 13, I was Benny Goodman's pool boy.
I was just gonna bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was his pool boy and his lawn boy, and later on I drove him to concerts and stuff. And I mean, what I learned from this guy was just mind-boggling. Because honestly, I mean, I was 13. I was just knocking on doors in our neighborhood.
Did you know it was Benny Goodman when you met him, or?
I don't think I did, and I wouldn't have known that he was a famous person. But what happened was our very rural Connecticut neighborhood after the war, Second World War, began to get kind of fancy. It had been just plumbers and carpenters and normal people. And then after the war, when the country started getting richer, we lived in Connecticut. We were about an hour from New York City. And it was pretty there. And these wealthy people said, hey, you know, I want to buy a summer house or weekend house around in this sort of rural spot and get away, and I can get there in an hour. So they did. And so all of a sudden, all these famous people started living all around us, and including the Sulzbergers that own and still own the New York Times, but Benny Goodman and who else? Gene Tunney was the heavyweight champ of the world at one point. Vivian Vance, who else? Peter Goldmark invented the long-playing record. I mean, I was just weeding his garden. He invented the friggin' long-playing record. God almighty, this is incredible, you know. So anyway, from Benny Goodman, though, the dramatic examples of what I learned. First day I went to work there, over the top, I'm kneeling in a bed of roses, weeding the garden, and over the top of his apple trees, I hear the sound of a clarinet, and it's just scales, like da 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 da, over and over and over. Every single day I went to work there that he was home, that's what I heard. And I filed away the fact that the most famous clarinetist in the world practices every day. So it was little stuff like that. And then, I don't know if you remember the story where he's throwing this big pool party. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. Would tell it. It's great.
Yeah, he's throwing this big pool party. These famous people flying in from all over the country. So I'm preparing for weeks, and the day comes, I've got the lawn mowed, the garden's weeded, the pool deck is swept, and the last thing to do is to vacuum the swimming pool. Well, I vacuumed the pool, and when I finish, it's glistening, you know, glowing, worthy of the Beverly Hills Hotel, until I go back to turn off the vacuum system, accidentally reverse it, and fire back into the pool all the dirt I had just vacuumed out, and probably some from weeks before. And the pool is black, it's polluted, and I have to go tell him that I have basically wrecked his party. And so I knock on his door, bring him out and show him. And after some swearing and I can't believe it, we got to get someone to fix this and everything, he finally just calms down. He looks at me and he says, Layng, you know what? I think people are going to laugh their asses off when they see this. It's going to be a great party. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he said, hey, I got to get upstairs and comb my hair. And no kidding, that one lesson jumped back at me so many times as we were raising our boys. The message being, he didn't need to tell me that I had screwed up his friggin' party. I already knew that. What he needed to tell me was that he still loved me, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that everything was going to be fine. And that is really what all of us basically need when we make giant mistakes, whether we're a kid or a person. We already know we've made the mistake. What we need to know is where we go from here and how we get there. And he was so instrumental in telling me that. My mom also had that. But this was important because it was this famous guy outside the family.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, anyway. That's incredible. One of the stories in the book that stuck out to me was your possible abduction by serial killers.
Oh yeah, that was pretty amazing. I decided. So after meeting Benny Goodman and all of these, famous people, it was very exciting to me because their worlds were so different. I mean, in the case of Benny, he'd have all these famous musicians over in his pool house, and he'd have me and 5 other people, and they'd play. And I thought, this is exciting. So between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I decided I would hitchhike completely around the United States, like north, south, east, west, 7,500 miles. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to see what does a real cactus look like, a real desert, a real Rocky Mountain, I wanted to go in the diners, hear the different accents, and, maybe work on a ranch a little while and make some money. So one day, with a big hug from my mom and $47, which sounds ridiculous in my pocket, it was 1962. That seemed like a lot of money to me. My mom dropped me off at the entrance to the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut, and I was gone for 2 months. And that trip taxed a few of my coping skills. And you're referring to an incident where these two guys picked me up in the middle of the night in Missoula, outside Missoula, Montana, pickup truck, told me I could ride in the back of it to Missoula, which was about 30 miles. But it was also 30 degrees outside, and I was in the back of it. And after riding 5 miles or something, they told me I could ride inside with them, but they wanted me to sit in the middle in between them. And when they got out of the car, they were clearly had a little beer, and they'd been smoking, and the smoke wafts out of the truck, and I was not dying to sit between these guys, but I was freezing in the middle of nowhere. So they also stopped one other time, and they just jumped out. But when I jumped out, thinking that I was saving my life, they just started taking a leak, pretending that I was like a moron for being so concerned. But then we got back in the car, and this truck, and this time I sat by the door, and we'd been driving for a little while, and the only light in the cab was the light of the dashboard, and dead silence, and it was just terrifying to me. And suddenly the one guy yells, hey, let's see about this boy. And they pull off the road, skidding sideways, and I opened my door, rolled out of the truck, and just ran over these outcroppings and just through the grass as fast as I could. And then they start sweeping this light looking for me. Can you see me, Susan? I just missed it.
Yeah, okay. I can see.
I just laid down in the grass as fast as I could, and they kept sweeping this light and telling me they were going to come and get me. And one of the guys yelled, "You all done but the fun, son." And I thought, oh my God, what are they talking about? And every time the light would sweep over me, I would jump up and run farther away. And finally I just heard the truck start, and they backed up, and they backed off, and they left. And I just lay there in the grass and looked up at the 7 million stars in the sky and tried to compose myself. And I gradually got up and walked out to the highway and just waited again for the hint of headlights coming in the opposite direction from the one they'd gone in. But that was not for an older person. That was for, you got to be young for that stuff. And it's always amazed that I don't know what they were going to do to me or for me, but
I can't imagine it was anything good. It sounds like
it was nothing good, and they were a little nuts, and it was in the total middle of nowhere. But I did go about 7,500 miles, and I had a few scary things. That was the scariest. One was a couple that was completely drunk, completely polluted, and their car was waving all over the road. That was scary, but nothing like these guys who I didn't know if they had guns or what their deal was.
Yeah, I think that they had no good intention.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Let's talk about your wife. You met her, and that you knew instantly that she was the person.
Yeah, I did. Her brother had been my best friend in college, and he later on asked me to be the best man at his wedding. And the day I drove in, a couple days before the ceremony, and saw his sister through their screen door, she was wearing one of those, you wouldn't remember, but there was a style of dress at the time called empire, which meant that the sort of the waist was right under the bust line, and the dress would sort of hang down. Anyway, she was wearing this orange dress in that style, and I just thought, and she was so beautiful and so tan and so slim and calm looking, and I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what I need, and by some miracle, she liked me too, which was incredible. So we've now been married for 54 years. But as I said, a lot of the basis of the story was halfway through our our 54 years, she was crippled in a car accident, and so she's a paraplegic. She's been in a wheelchair now for 26 or 7 years. But the crazy part is, Susan, we have a fabulous life. Despite that, we've gone anywhere we ever wanted to go, other countries. We can go up people's front steps, and she's tough. She's very strong, and we both want to do things. We want to go places, and whether it's the beach or somebody's house for dinner, or Paris or somewhere like that. And I mean, we've gone in places. We went in and we busted our tail to get to an Indian restaurant in London one time. That guy wouldn't let us in. He said he didn't allow wheelchairs in his restaurant. So I mean, there's crazy stuff that happens. But in general, most people will knock themselves out to help us, and we often need help in one kind or another. I mean, Linda, when she first had her accident, Susan, if you can believe this, she had these spasms. They were so powerful, they would bolt her right out of the wheelchair. So she would be going down the sidewalk by herself and just get fired out of the wheelchair onto the sidewalk. And she would, have to ask someone to pick her up. The most amazing version of that happened, and on that day when she was coming out of the shower, she has a special shower chair that she has to use to take a shower. And the spasm bolted her out of the chair onto the floor, and she couldn't reach her cell phone. She couldn't, get up. She couldn't do it. And so after about an hour, the UPS man knocked on the door downstairs, and she called and said, "Will you please come and pick me up?" So he comes up, and there she is lying there with no clothes on the floor, and he picks her up and puts her back in the wheelchair. But she is so tough. I mean, she just said she didn't bat an eyelash. She said, "Hey, I got back in the chair, and the guy was great, gave me his cell phone number if that ever happened again, that he'd help me," because he knew that, anyway, so there's basically nothing except playing tennis and riding bikes and stuff that we can't do that we want to do.
It's to me extraordinary when I read about that, because in reality, statistically speaking, the chances of you getting a divorce after an accident like that is pretty high.
Yeah, the doctor told us it was 80%. That he told them every Thursday or something, they had these meetings for all the people in the, whatever it would have been, paraplegic ward or whatever, that people who were crippled. And there were about 8 of us, and sometimes the people would bring their husbands or wives, and I always went because I moved up there. The accident happened in Pennsylvania. I just moved up there for 11 weeks, so I was always at these meetings. But he would tell us, 80% of you are going to be divorced after. Honestly, I never paid attention to that for 14 seconds because I knew Linda, my wife, could think. Nothing was wrong with her brain, so I knew as long as we could talk, that was our relationship. I mean, we're friends before anything else, and I knew that if we could, do this together and talk about it together, that we would figure out how to do it, and we have. But a lot of it is, I mean, Susan, her adjustment was like 1,100 times more than mine. Mine was pretty strong, but hers, I mean, she's the one who has to do all this stuff.
Sure.
And as I mentioned in the book, I mean, just her getting dressed. I mean, I promise you, if anyone were to watch her get dressed, she said, "Well, how do you do that?" And initially, it did take her 45 minutes to get dressed because, I mean, her body is still damp from the shower. And, she's only moves from the chest up, just her shoulders and her arms. She can't adjust her legs or anything, but without, picking them up and moving. So, but now she can get dressed in, I mean, I used to say 4 minutes, but it's less. I think she can get dressed in 2 minutes now, which is just totally amazing. But she can also do, she drives. We've got a car that's got hand controls. And I promise you, I don't think I could do this one time. She rolls to the car, slides into the driver's seat, takes the cushion off her chair, folds up her chair, tucks the chair into the seat behind her seat. I mean, it's just ridiculous when you see her do it. And goes off and, gets her hair cut or something. I mean, she's just totally amazing. And one of the proofs that makes me know how amazing it is that there are 10,000 new people a year who are confined to wheelchairs. We go everywhere, and we almost never see anyone in a wheelchair. And, that includes the movies or a restaurant or just walking down the street in New York. But like a few months ago, we were in New York, and we walked 304 blocks. Well, that sounds totally impossible, but in 2 days, New York is interesting. And so you just keep walking. You have coffee, go to a bookstore, see something, worthwhile, a museum or a park or something like that. And at the end of the day, you've walked 140, 150 blocks because it's just what it does.
New York is a 10-mile-a-day town for sure.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it's all done in these tiny increments, so it's not like someone says, okay, you have 2 hours to get, 150 blocks. It isn't. It's just short. So, but, yes, I do the pushing, but Linda gets every time there's a cut, sidewalk, there's, in the cuts in the sidewalk about every 5 feet.
Yeah.
And those clicks just go through her, and then none of the curb cuts in New York City, for one place, are very smooth. So she's getting bounced and bounced and bounced. So she's putting up with all that. But the what we get from that is these great trips and this excitement of, seeing these places and, Fenway Park or, the Red Sox, Yankees or whatever. We can go to that stuff and, the byproduct of all the effort and annoyance is that we get to do this stuff. I'm trying to make the camera so I'm seeing. Anyway, so what's crazy is that we just think we're really lucky.
Well, absolutely.
we think we're having a great life.
The fact that she didn't die in the accident is extraordinary.
You're right.
Yeah.
I went to see, the car, we have pictures of the car just totally mangled, and she was hanging upside down when the wrecking crew gets there with the acetylene torches and the power tools and everything to get her out of the thing. She's just hanging by her seatbelt upside down, unconscious.
Yeah.
Our kid youngest boy was in the car with her. He was 15. He was thrown out of the car. But when he saw her, after he sort of gathered himself, he thought she was dead, and he went out to the side of the road and flagged down a car. No one would stop, of course, because it's in the middle of nowhere and it was night. But finally some guy did stop. It was the early days of cell phones of 1993. And he did have a cell phone, and he called, got the helicopter and the ambulance for him and all this stuff. But, an amazing adventure for him. And he's really unable, even at this late date, to talk about that night very much he can't really talk about it. So we don't really ask him about it. But
yeah, I imagine it was very traumatic for him, and he's lucky. The fact that he was ejected, that he still has his life is extraordinary.
Oh, God, what a miracle. The doctor was so unbelievably skilled when he spoke with me when I got him on the phone and didn't know anything about it. In the first place, the number that had been left at the motel where we were supposed to spend the night, it was kind of a miracle that they found it. What they did was, after they got my wife to the hospital, they rifled through her purse and they found the confirmation for the hotel, and they called there thinking maybe I would be there. And the number they left for me to call when I got there, when I reached them, was the chaplain. So the first person that said, I'm the chaplain. I thought, oh, God. But anyway, she quickly connected me with the surgeon who filled me in. But he was so skilled at telling me. He said, I said, how's my family? And he said, well, your son is fine. He's got a couple of nicks and stuff, but your wife has been roughed up a little bit. And I said, well, like what? And he told me that, her vital signs were strong, and that at the moment her legs were unable to move. And I said, well, can she think? And he said, yeah, she can think. Her brain's fine. And I said, well, then we're fine. And it was true.
How was it trying to relearn intimacy with somebody who has no feeling below the rib
Well, sex as we know it is 150,000% gone. But Susan, I don't really know what happens to people, but I kind of felt like one of those birds that, my feathers are red, but now that it's fall, they're brown and no one can see me. Something happened in my body, and hers too, where all of a sudden our sex drive wasn't as powerful. Our love drive, our cuddly drive, so to speak, was just as powerful, but the sex drive was vastly diminished, and that is just a total miracle. And I just don't know how in the world nature does that, but they did it on us, and it's amazing. Because we just usually fall asleep either holding hands or with our arms around each other. I don't know. It's just still seems like a great life, which again is a total miracle.
It's wonderful, and I'm glad that she didn't have any brain damage, thank God. And you wrote about, in fact, it went quite viral, an article in the Modern Love, the New York Times.
Yes. Yeah, well, after, I think it was about 15 years after the accident, I kept trying to put it into words, really just mostly for myself, but just how would I describe, that night and what it's been like since and stuff. And it took a long time. It took a couple of years. I would go to this coffee shop here, the Frothy Monkey, and just try to type this story. And I walk and have for the last 50 years, 3 times a week with a guy who's a Vanderbilt professor, and he's the total whiz kid. And so when I got the story in what I thought was good shape, I said, would you please take a look at this? And he read it, and he said, Layng, this is beautifully written, but unless you tell me why it was hard, why it's the nitty-gritty of it, I don't really feel it, because I can say I had a hard time or a hard this or that. I don't know why it's any different from yours, so you got to tell me. And that was when I wrote all the nitty-gritty. I wrote about the bowel movements and the lack of sex and the simple discomforts, like the remote falls off the bed in the morning when you reach for your glasses and you can't reach it, so you can't turn on the TV and you're just locked there. All these, the realities of it. And once I did that, Susan, the story totally came to life. And I was reading the Modern Love column one day, and at the very bottom it said, if you think you have a modern love story, email it to this address. So I said, well, that's what our story is. It's modern love. And I fired it to this guy, and like a few hours later, he wrote back and he said, I'm going to print this. And I thought, well, this is definitely the most exciting thing that's happened in a hell of a long time. And he said, this story is fantastic. It's going to get enormous response. And they printed it, and it did get this incredibly overwhelming response from all over the world. And it was at a time then my enthusiasm for writing songs, which I felt so strongly for 40 plus years, really was dimming. I wasn't waking up with a song in my heart, so to speak, every day like you have to. I wasn't as obsessed with it as I knew I had been when in my best production years. And so when all of this response came in from the New York Times story, I just kept writing. I just said, this is the most wonderful feeling, because I felt as though I were making contact with families and what I call love-based people. And so I just kept writing, and it took 10 years. And when I was finished, it took a long time to know that I was finished, because I would keep waking up after 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, waking up saying, I need to add this, or this isn't clear, or I need to acknowledge this or that person, or whatever. So it took a long time to actually be finished. But after 10 years, which was just earlier this year, I said, I wasn't waking up with any new things that I thought should go in it. So I knew it was finished. And, there was just as a crazy, this is amazing. I had incredibly bright people read this thing, and I said, find any mistakes you can find in this. And they all did, sent me their mistakes. Then I took it back to my Vanderbilt whiz kid friend, who had made a life of reading stories and correcting them. He found 3 yellow page pages of mistakes. And they were really impossible mistakes to find, like one comma extra in a set of quotes because I, made a mistake. I mean, you could scan the page with your eye and never spot this.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing like a wonderful editor. They make all the difference in the world. And this is for the book. So what happened was the Modern Love article was the catalyst to write the book, Permission to Fly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Without that,
And I'll put a link to the article on HeyHumanPodcast.com so people can go and read it because it's still out there.
Yeah, it's called In a Charmed Life, A Road Less Traveled. But if you just Google my name, Layng Martine Jr., was spelled Layng, very weird spelling, Martine Jr., the article will pop up.
Yeah.
If you just start In a Charmed Life, it'll come up.
And like I said, I keep a links page on the website, so it'll be there too. Let's talk about Elvis really quick, because that's an interesting story.
Elvis was probably the biggest musical and or emotional awakening of my whatever year would have been, 56. I was about 14. But I was riding to the movies with my 7th grade girlfriend, and my mom was driving us, and Heartbreak Hotel came on the radio, and I just heard that sound. I heard that voice, and I just leaned forward to my mom. I said, "Mom, what is that? Please turn it up." And the DJ said, "That was Elvis Presley, young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, with Heartbreak Hotel." And I said in the book, but a switch flipped in my heart, and it never went off, and it didn't, because if I hear that record or Elvis right now, it just completely freaks me out. But I never thought of writing songs ever, even though as much as I loved records, and I had every record known to man growing up. But it wasn't until I was about to be a senior in college that I was painting a house one summer, and all my friends had been interning for Merrill Lynch and big companies and stuff, and they were really excited about it. And I thought, God, man, all those companies would hate my guts. They'd fire me in an hour. What am I going to do? How am I going to earn a living? And I had my radio by me while I was painting this house, and I heard a song that I loved, and I thought, I wonder if I could ever write a song. And for some odd reason, I thought, yeah, I can write a song. I can do it. And I wrote this song, and I knew I had to make a demo of it. And I also read all the music magazines, so I knew in New York City, which was close to us, where all these guys hung out, and it was a bar called the Turf Bar. Well, I was going to college at Columbia University, which is just up the street from this bar, or 50 blocks. So I took the subway down to this bar, and I didn't have the guts to go in there the first 2 or 3 days that I went in, but I finally found the guts, and I went in and asked if I just found some guys that kind of weird looking guys. I figured, well, they must be songwriters. They were. So I told them that I'd written a song, but I didn't play an instrument. Where could I hire some musicians? And they said, well, hey, how does this song have music if you don't play anything? And I said, well, I just sing it. They said, in the air? And I said, yeah, just in the air. And they laughed, thought that was hysterical, but they told me where to go make my demo. And for $80, I made a demo. And I thought, well, this is perfect for Elvis. And I went home, looked at my Elvis records, and found the business info that's always listed in the publisher information. Connected me with a company that had an office in New York called Hill and Range. And I went up there with my little demo and played it for him and said I thought it was for Elvis. And the guy said, well, I don't think it's for Elvis, but it might be for these guys. And anyway, it just started on my taking the songs around in New York in between my classes. But when I got to Nashville, there was an address that people sent songs to. So anything that I thought was close, I started sending it to this address, and I never heard anything. But one day, after I'd been in Nashville about, 5 or 6 years, I sat down next to a very famous publisher by the name of Bob Beckham, and he published Chris Christopherson and Burnin' Love, and a bunch of fantastic records. And he knew that I was knocking myself out pitching songs, and I got a lot of records recorded myself. And he said, Layng, you work your ass off. If you have a song for Elvis, bring it to me and I'll get it to the producer, which was an impossible thing to do. And everyone wanted this line of communication that he had with the producer, but nobody had it, just him. I brought him this song. He called, the producer heard it, called up Ray Stevens, who was my publisher, and said that Elvis was going to go crazy for the song. 3 or 4 months passed. Susan, I never heard another word. And then again on the street, I heard that Elvis was again looking for songs. I took the song back to this man, and his secretary called me about a half an hour later and said, Layng, I think Elvis has already recorded this song. And I said, well, that's impossible because I would know. And she said, let me check. Called back 30 seconds later and said, yeah, he recorded it, gave me the date, October of the previous year. And he said, it's done. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, honestly, as much as I needed the money to keep living everything, the payoff was that this guy that I'd idolized had listened to me singing my demo and learned my songs listening to me and made a record of it. And that just seemed totally impossible. But anyway, they put it out as a single. It was literally the last new song he ever recorded, because when my song reached number 1 on the country charts, he died a day or two after it reached number 1.
The song Way Down.
Way down. Way on down. Way on down.
So anyway, it hit number 1 and he passed away.
Yeah. What happened was that, you probably know this, but you can find out the songs that are going to be, or how they're going to be ranked the next week in Billboard. Like today's Tuesday, you could call up Billboard today and you could find out what's going to be number 1 next week in Billboard. And so I had a friend who called up, he was a promotion guy, and he found out that my song was going to be number 1 next week. So I think it was Tuesday actually. And then I think it was Thursday that I was playing tennis in Rhode Island on vacation. I got a phone call at the tennis court that Elvis had died. And it was just beyond belief. The very last chance in the world to ever get a song recorded by this guy. The most famous singer who ever lived, I think, in probably anybody's estimation.
The arc of that story is so fantastic, to think that at 14, or, however, in 7th grade, you were like, this is going to be my life. I want to do this. This has inspired me. And then, how old were you when the song came out?
Well, let's see, 77, I would have been 35.
Man.
So, yeah, the idea that however many years later that would be, say 21 years later, I'm sitting in that recording studio in Nashville listening to them mix my song with Elvis Presley singing, and I just thought, this is more impossible than it's even dream-upable,
It's a great lesson in perseverance. You say something in the book, I wrote it down, I quoted it. It's, I keep planting stuff till something lives.
Yeah, that's Susan, it's just amazing that you noticed that one line, because I have thought about that so many times, that one simple line, because that really seems so often to be the key to, but I was referring at that time to this garden that I had planted near Linda's elevator shaft at our house in Rhode Island. It was just this 8-foot square garden, and every year during the winter, the ocean would come in and swell up and flood a few of these plants, and a bunch of stuff would die, so that every spring I would have to replant what had died. But I gradually learned the things that wouldn't die. And so, but I did write that line in there, and I thought, God, that applies to everything. I just keep planting stuff until something lives.
Yeah.
And that is so much the key to life, because most things probably don't live, but something will. And if you just keep slamming at it,
keep planting. Keep planting.
Yeah, keep planting, Susan. Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, it really stood out to me as a metaphor for your entire existence, really, and all of our existences. I think it's easy.
I think it is. I do think you're right. It applies to everybody.
We get bogged down so much in the daily minutia, and we think all these things, thinking, well, what's it's easy to get into your head of what's the point of it all. And then one little thing changes everything, and you never know what that is.
I think it's so important to remember. I know it has been for me. Not that many fantastic things have to happen. It's not like you say, like with the breadcrumbs, that every one of those breadcrumbs has to draw a fish or something. They don't. Just once in a while. And then if you love grilling your hamburgers and your friends and the sunshine and stuff, you've got a chance every day to have a really great life. Everything you do doesn't have to work. It's not going to work. You can't be surprised that most of it's not going to work, but some of it will. And the odds go up. I mean, this is so hokey, but I did tell our kids that, just imagine in baseball, instead of getting 3 swings, you've got as many swings as you had the guts and energy to take. Do you think you'd get more hits? Well, duh, you would.
Yeah.
So it's just so hokey sounding, but God, it really applies to everything,
It's true, and baseball is a great metaphor because a baseball great has probably missed far more balls than he's hit.
Oh, God, that's so true. Many more strikeouts than...
Absolutely, but the greatest of all time have still managed to get a few in there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Layng, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you. I want everyone to go read Permission to Fly and to also just check out songs you've written. And I'm going to, again, on the links page on heyhumanpodcast.com, I'm going to put a whole bunch of stuff about you, so it'll be easy to find you.
Well, thank you. And if any of you read Permission to Fly and like it, I would love it if you'd write a review on Amazon. It's got about 70 5-star reviews right now, and I'd love to have yours. I'd love to have yours, Susan, if you ever have a spare moment.
I'd be happy to do that. And how can people find you just in general on social media and such?
Well, I have a website, LayngMartineJr.com, and anybody who emails me, I answer.
Wonderful. Layng, thank you
Susan,
so much.
You are a total ace, and I thank you so much. You're not only a fantastic interviewer, but you're enormously persistent, because we had lots of fits and starts to get this together, and you stuck with it, and we made it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Please give my love to your family.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye, Susan.
Bye, everybody. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. Thank you. Bye.